All right, welcome to a Sunday morning coffee roast. We're going to get started here. Got a dual blend going on this morning. In my live stream earlier, I had some audio issues, so I'm doing a post edit here with some audio. I'm just kind of doing a little after review. I've had this coffee roaster for a couple of months now. I did an initial review the first time I used it, and I really liked it. It was a lot better. Used some Sweet Maria's coffee beans here. Sweet Maria is where I get all my coffee beans. I have a subscription to their 2-month, 8 pounds shipment. That's the thing I like about them, that you can set up a regular shipment on a 2-month basis or a 1-month basis, whatever you want. 4 pounds to 8 pounds, those are the two options that they have. I do 8 pounds every 2 months. So I just poured in the 2 bags of coffee there. I get the sampler pack, so it's just kind of a little bit of everything. So I have 2 different types of coffee beans in here. I don't remember which ones exactly I did, and I've already thrown the bag away. So I do blend 2 different coffee types together, though, 1 pound each, when I do a roast. Occasionally I do 1 pound, but since I got this new roaster, I'm able to do 2 pounds at a time, and that just makes it so I can usually go 2 weeks without having to roast. So when I first got this roaster, it comes with a thermometer. It's like a probe type thermometer. And I used the probe thermometer. I had it stuck in the little hole that it has there that goes into the drum, so that wire sticking out of. And I just put it in there when I started roasting. Didn't think anything about it and let it go. And the next thing I know, it's kind of melting. So I have always had this other thermometer here, and I had used it when I had first started roasting with the popcorn popper. That was, how I first started roasting coffee, using the popcorn popper. And I had this, thermometer, and I had this probe that stuck down into the pot, and it was giving me the temperature. Because when you roast a coffee or a popcorn popper, you can't really see what's going inside there. And that's one of the things I like about these 2 different drum roasters I've had. My previous one I have in some, prior videos that you can see. It's kind of a cheaper one. It's a cheaper way to start out. It's about $50 to $80 on Amazon, and you can just look up drum or coffee roaster on Amazon, and a bunch of options will pop up. I like using this drum machine here. I actually like this one here because it's a steel basket. I have to roast it at a little bit higher of a temperature, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. I'm trying to expedite the actual roast for time's sake here, because I'm doing the live stream. So back to the thermometer. The thermometer I've had, and this type of thermometer, because it's got that electric temperature lead there, you're able to stick it into the drum and just let it sit there, and there's a hole that goes into the drum there, and it measures the temperature inside the drum, and that's kind of the key things to roasting coffee. It's kind of all about temperature. Once you get to a certain temperature, you're going to start paying attention to the sound and the smell a little bit more, and temperature is going to gauge whether you want a light roast, light medium, medium dark, those types of roasts. And it's all about temperature, and there's a very small window between those temperature ranges for when you're roasting coffee. Generally speaking, I go by color. There is a temperature chart, and I believe it starts at like 415 degrees is when a light roast is kind of coming into play. And then you just kind of watch it from the 415 degree area. At 410, you want to be paying attention to it. But this, with your roast and your timing and all that, because once it starts getting to the temperature you want, once you start roasting and you do your first roast, you got to find that happy medium of what your flavor is like. Are you a medium, type coffee drinker? Do you like light roast? Do you like dark roast? Do you like espresso roast? And it's all going to be about that temperature range. So at about 415 degrees is when you want to start paying a lot more attention to the temperature and the color and the smell and the amount of smoke that starts coming out of it. On top of that, there are some signs before it gets to that range where the coffee beans will start cracking or making a popping sound like popcorn. It's more of a crack than a pop, but that's going to generally start happening in about 350 to 370. You're going to get what's called the first crack, and then once you get up into the 400 range, 410, you're going to start getting the second crack. And you're listening for these cracks because that's going to give you an indication of when the beans are getting close to being ready, or at least monitored for the light on up to the dark roast. So I generally roast my coffee beans at about 440. I found with this new roaster at 440 is the temperature that we like to have. So at about 435 degrees, I'll turn the heat off and I'll let the roast continue and the drum continue to spin to kind of get that up to that temperature. And then by 440, it's kind of the quick grab. You got to wear your protective gloves for the heat because this drum's going to be really, really hot. And you'll see what I have here towards the end as far as the gloves go. Now, the one thing I found with this drum here, because of the way the door is latched, I actually use a pair of pliers to open the door, and you'll see that when we get towards the end. Because this drum is hot and it's kind of hard to move that latch over with these big heavy gloves that I have. If I had a different type of gloves, I could probably get something that fits a little tighter and better and work that door. But right now, for the gloves that I use, I need to use a pair of pliers to get that door open so that I can dump the coffee beans into my strainer. And we're going to talk about that process once it's complete. The process we're going to go through to finish these beans off and get them ready for drinking, grinding down and drinking. So like I said, once this thing gets to about 415 degrees, just going to kind of pay attention to it. We're going to be looking for that color change, and all beans kind of roast the same. This is my finishing colander right here for straining and for doing the de-chafing process. The chafe is basically the skin off of the coffee bean that during the roasting process, peels off. And you'll see what I'm talking about here once we dump the beans in. That there's going to be quite a bit of chafe that's going to come out because I am roasting 2 pounds, which is a pretty large batch for this little colander. I've thought about getting a second colander for doing this because, when I first started doing this, I was roasting using 1 pound, and it was a lot easier to de-chafe 1 pound in this colander. Now that I do 2 pounds, it's a lot more, and it kind of fills this basket. And, you got to kind of shake it around. Now, the basket is the strainer. The colander is sitting on top of a fan. And the fan is blowing up through the colander, and what it's going to do is it's going to cool the beans, but it's also going to blow the chafe as we shake it. So we'll kind of show that process as we're getting down there closer to it. So we're almost 9 minutes in here. We're probably a little less than 9 minutes, and I see that the temperature on the thermometer there is about 325 degrees. So the heat's rising. And like I said, once we get to the first crack area, the process is going to go pretty quick. And like I said, I'm kind of doing a sped up roast here with a high heat, just because we're doing live. But another great thing I like about this roaster is you can see the beans bouncing around in the drum there. There's a clear, glass window that you can see the beans in, which really makes it nice. It's a lot easier to see, monitor what's going on inside the drum. roaster. It was a basket roaster, and it was basically, like a screen basket, and you could see in it, but you really couldn't see the color very well, because with use, the basket started getting necessarily burn marks, but just wear marks from the heat and stuff like that, and it was turning a darker color, and so it became really hard to tell where the beans actually were. You would look at it and it would seem like it was getting done, but it actually wasn't. It was just the basket making the color look like it was getting done. So that's why I like this upgrade I did here with this coffee roaster. And like I said, this is only about $150 on Amazon, $130, something like that. And like I said, just go to Amazon, do a search for coffee roaster, and you'll get a whole bunch of options that pop up. There's a whole bunch of these types on there. I think there's just a whole bunch of different sellers that sell this type. And there's other types you can use too. And like I said, you can start with a basket or even a popcorn popper to try it out and see what you like. The popcorn popper is going to cost you about $25. The thermometer here, I forget the price on the thermometer, but I want to say it was like $40 or $50. But it's really hard to use this with the basket roaster, the basket drum that has the screen on it. There's just no way to actually use the thermometer. You have to really go more by look and smell, and kind of make an educated guess when you think it's ready to come off. You'll have to turn the gas off, and you'll have to open the basket and look in it and see where it's at. It's really hard to measure temperature in that drum basket. So this coffee roaster for me was a really, really great upgrade. I had the basket drum roaster for a couple of years before I actually melted it. Some of the parts were plastic, and I think I had the heat up a little too high, and it had actually kind of not necessarily melted, but it softened the plastic where it mounted to the holder, and it just kind of became unusable after just many roasts. So I was glad to upgrade and move on to something else. I do this as a hobby just because we enjoy good coffee. A nice, good, fresh roasted coffee is great. The flavor that you get from the different types of roast, and testing it out and just kind of flavor testing what you like. 1 week you can do kind of a light roast, the next week you can do kind of a medium roast. You can try a dark roast. You don't have to do 2 pounds. You can do a pound. You can do a half a pound. You can do how much you want, and you can do just enough for a cup if you wanted to. It's going to be a little harder to measure the temperature on it, but because you have that glass window there, it makes it a lot easier. So this coffee is going to be getting really close. We're just approaching 13 minutes here on this roast, and these coffee beans, I can tell by looking at them that they're getting kind of close. They've already hit. It looks to me like at least a light roast. The temperature on it's about 405. It looks like. Looking at the thermometer, it's kind of hard for me to read here. So this is kind of the area where you just got to keep an eye on it, because you're going to see that the temperature is going to start climbing pretty good, and it's not going to be a whole heck of a lot of time until it goes from 410 to 420. And that's when you're definitely going to want to start paying attention. If you're a light coffee drinker, 415, you're going to want to get that turned off. You can see the color of the beans right there right now. And the temperature looks like it's right at 410 right now, 411. So it's starting to increase. The smoke is going to start increasing more. And this is going to be why you want to do this outdoors. There's a lot of chaff that's going to be coming out of the roaster because it's got vent slots, and so chaff's going to come out of it, so it's kind of making a mess. And then on top of that, you have a pretty good amount of smoke that's going to start coming out of there as the temperature rises. So I'm kind of just setting the camera up here for the pour. Once it's done, I'm going to stop the roaster and pour it into the colander there. and then you'll get to see kind of the finished product. And then once it's done, we'll go ahead now. So we're already at 427 degrees. Just a minute after, we were at 405. So, you know, the process is going to move right along. We're 432 now. So this is about the time where I'm starting to decide when I want to turn the burner off. I kind of like a medium to dark roast, and here I'm turning the burner off. I've turned the gas off, and I'm going to let the drum, you know, roll a couple more times, you know, turn a couple more times. Here you can see the amount of smoke that's coming out of it. That's a good indication that you're kind of starting to get to a dark roast area. I think this was a good medium to dark roast that I did here as a final outcome. So I've got the drum door on the top there, and I'm going to grab my pliers to open the door. And once the door is open, I'm going to grab that. You see my gloves there, they're pretty big and bulky. It's really hard to open that little door switch with that. And you can already start seeing some of the chaff start flying out of the basket there. So, you know, just looking at it right there, it looks like a nice medium dark roast, 440 degrees. I think it ended up at 445. So it's kind of getting into the dark area. So going to do shake on it, and lots of chaff flying out. And this is just going to be the cooling process and the finishing process here. We're going to shake it. You'll end up getting some chaff out of it. Once we finish this process here, we're going to let the coffee beans sit. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can let the beans rest. You want to let them rest for about 24 hours, and it's not like they're really resting. It's called the degassing process, and I believe it's the coffee beans will release carbon dioxide, a gas, you know, in their final, you know, moments after roasting, and so you want to let them breathe. There's a couple of different types of bags and containers you can get that will let them breathe properly so that they can degas. Now you just basically want to wait about 24 hours. I just leave it in the colander and I leave it out on the counter. You know, it makes the kitchen smell really good. And I just let it sit on the counter for overnight, and then we'll start drinking it the next day. So that's pretty much the process here. The roaster, I really do like it. I did find that I do need to roast at a higher temperature because of the metal drum. It's not the basket drum, so it seems like it takes a little more heat to get that drum roasting. I mean, I think one of my first or second roasts, you know, it took me 25 to 30 minutes to do a roast because I was just trying to be careful with it, and I didn't want to go too hot, and I, you know, felt like I was just doing it too cold. So I've turned the heat up on it, definitely more than I used to use, and it's really works out really nice. I get a really even roast. With the other basket roaster I had, the cheaper one, I didn't get as even of a roast on the bean as I do with this drum roaster here. And, you know, as soon as this is done here, I'm going to do a close-up so you can kind of get a look at, you know, how the coffee looks in the end here as a finished product. Coffee roasting, you know, is something fun to do. It really only takes, I mean, we're at 20 minutes right now. I mean, realistically, I could have turned the temperature up a little bit more and got done a little faster. With the basket drum roaster I used to have, I was basically getting something done within 10 to 15 minutes. And it really comes down to the amount of heat you apply to get the roasting going. I kind of feel that the longer you let it roast, the more, you know, better the flavor is, a little stronger flavor, coffee flavor. The quicker, it just didn't seem like it was roasting as even. I kind of, use the gas valve as a gauge to, where I want it to be for the amount of heat I'm using on a regular basis. Seems to give me consistent heat, consistent flame. So I just kind of find out where it's positioned on the tank, and I just go to that setting every time. And I'm just looking to get the temperature to try to be the same every time I roast. And I still kind of feel like this roast was probably a little longer than I wanted it to be. But again, I'm trying not to go too hot, and I'm trying not to be too cold either. But you're going to see here as I finish doing the de-chafing what the final product looks like and how dark and how roasted it comes out at the end. Again, Sweet Maria's online. You could just do a Google search for Sweet Maria, and they've got everything you can think of when it comes to roasting. A lot of tutorials, roasting guides, coffee beans, coffee roasters, coffee pots. I mean, anything really to do with coffee, you can kind of get that there. It's a great supplier. They're in Oakland, California. So, I live up in Washington. So when I get an order of beans from them, it generally takes 2 days with the cheapest shipping method, which I believe is like a UPS special ground or something like that, which I don't even know what that is, but it costs about $10. And I believe for the 8 pounds, it's $49, I believe, for the 8-pound green coffee sampler. And like I said, I'm on a 2-month subscription on it. So every 2 months, they will send me out a new a fresh set of 8 pounds. And it's all mixed variety. You don't have to get a variety pack. You can, get the type of coffee you're looking for, whether it's a Colombian or a Guatemalan or, whatever. They have so many different types of coffee available. Whatever your preference is, you can definitely get through them and do a roast on. I recommend it for a coffee lover, even if you're not a coffee lover and you just like to, have fun hobbies to do, something to do on the weekends. I do this every Sunday morning. I'm actually doing it every other Sunday morning now because I am doing 2 pounds at a time. But here's a great shot of the final product. It's a good medium to dark roast. It's going to have a lot of flavor. And whether you want to do a French press or a pour over type coffee, or you just want to do a home brew, we have a coffee maker that grinds the beans before it brews the coffee, so we get fresh grind every morning. They're a little bit more pricey, but the end result is really, really good. It's really nice having that nice fresh ground coffee brewed in the morning, and the smell to wake up to is just great. Set the timer on the coffee pot, and next thing you know, you got some really nice smells and flavors going on in the morning. So that's all I got for you. I hope you enjoyed this video and you got a little good information out of it. Again, coffee drum roaster on Amazon, and the digital thermometer there with the wire probe. It's a great combination. I just have a little $20 fan down here with the stainless steel colander to do the roasting. I highly recommend, if you're a coffee lover, that you try doing this. It's really cheap to get started, and it's pretty easy to learn. I've kind of gone through the key points here to get you going, and good luck to you. That looks great, and it smells so good. Fresh coffee. Once you've tried it, you'll never want to go back. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time.